Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm John Favreau.
I'm Dan Pfeiffer.
Later in the pod, our interview with Veep's Julia. Later in the pod, our interview with Veep's Julia Louis-Dreyfus and showrunner David Mandel. They stopped by the office yesterday, and as you'll hear, we pretty much laughed the entire time. It was one of my favorite interviews. But first, we got some big news to get through. Robert Mueller's first words in 2 years, the political case for impeachment, and the Democratic Party's new qualifications for the fall debates. In other pod news, we've released an interview on Wednesday between Dan and Amy Klobuchar. I'll also be talking with presidential candidate Marianne Williamson on Friday, and you'll be able to hear my conversation with her later that afternoon. On the newest episode of Pod Save the World, Tommy and Ben explain the recent European parliamentary elections, analyze Trump's trip to Japan, and try to understand why he's micromanaging the construction of our aircraft carriers. Weird. I'm just going to say this again. Tommy and Ben explain the recent European Parliament elections. Not parliamentary. Okay. And finally, the newest Crooked Media podcast, This Land, premieres this coming Monday, June 3rd. It's a story from Cherokee journalist Rebecca Nagel about two crimes and an imminent Supreme Court decision, could come any week now, that will determine the fate of 5 tribes and nearly half the land in Oklahoma. It's an important story about how this country treats Native people and their land. It's riveting. It's beautifully told. So please go subscribe now. Listen to the trailer wherever you get your podcasts, or you can just go to thislandpodcast.com to subscribe. Make sure it's on your phone and ready for Monday morning when the first episode drops. Trust me, you won't want to miss this one, so please go subscribe. One last thing.
Subscribed.
You subscribed? Thank you. See, Dan subscribed. All of you should subscribe too. For next week, we're on the road again. I can't believe we're already on the road again.
My God.
You can catch Love It or Leave It in Minneapolis and catch Pod Save America in Chicago, Minneapolis, and Des Moines. There's still a few tickets left, I believe, at crooked.com/events. So go scoop up those tickets and then come say hi. We'll be flying around the Midwest. Okay.
One more thing before we get to the news.
Sure.
I watched Running with Beto last night.
Wasn't it great?
It was really great, and I would encourage people, whether they support Beto for president or they support someone else, they don't know who they're supporting yet, to watch it for a couple of reasons. One, it's a really good film, but I thought it captured two things really well that let me try that again. I thought it captured two things really well that I think people will really enjoy. One is the moment in time that was 2018 and people's reaction to what happened in 2016 and just sort of regular everyday people getting involved in politics to try to put this country back on the right track. And second, what it's like to be on a campaign. Yeah. The highs, the lows, the exhaustion, the frustration, the excitement, and ultimately
Can I get 2 number 9s, a number 9 large, a number 6?
I'm sure this was true for you in watching it, but having worked on campaigns where you pour your entire being into them and then having them come up short it's just so hard. But so I thought it was really great.
Can I get 2 number 9?
And I was excited to see your name in the credits.
2 number 9.
Yeah, I mean, the reason that we wanted to help co-produce this in the first place is, the filmmaker David Medigliani came to us, when no one really knew who Beto was, and we barely knew who Beto was, and said he was going to make this documentary about people in Texas working for this long shot candidate in the wake of 2016. And it's sort of everything that we talk about here at Crooked Media and Pod Save America about getting involved and joining a campaign and, fighting the odds to fight for what you believe in. And so, we jumped on then, and I think, David told an incredible story about people in Texas working for what they believe in. So, the documentary doesn't just follow Beto, it follows 3 volunteers who worked on the campaign who all have pretty powerful stories on their own. So it's a great film.
It just doesn't give you the option?
Check it out on HBO. Okay, let's get to the news. On Wednesday, Special Counsel Robert Mueller spoke publicly for the first time in 2 years to announce his retirement and send an implicit but unmistakable message to Congress about impeachment. Do your damn job. Here are some key parts of his statement. Quote, The Russian military launched a concerted attack on our political system. The matters we investigated were of paramount importance. And when a subject of an investigation obstructs that investigation or lies to investigators, it strikes at the core of the government's effort to find the truth and hold wrongdoers accountable. And he says that on the question of whether the president obstructed justice himself, quote, if we had confidence that the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said so.
I don't care.
Mueller goes on to say that the reason he didn't make a determination about whether Trump committed a crime is because, quote, under a long-standing department policy, a president cannot be charged with a federal crime while he is in office. The opinion says that the Constitution requires a process other than the criminal justice system to formally accuse a sitting president of wrongdoing. So it would be unfair to potentially accuse somebody of a crime when there can be no court resolution of the actual charge. Mueller also said that he doesn't plan on speaking publicly again because his 400-page report speaks for itself. Dan, why did Mueller, after 2 years and about a month since the report itself came out, decide to give this statement? What was he trying to achieve here, do you think?
I think he was trying to go on vacation. I think Memorial Day weekend is past us. He's probably got a home at the shore. He wanted to get there.
Get his aimbot.
I think, so, like I say that's half in jest, which is I think he is trying to put a coda on this part of his life and faggot. Move on. And he is saying, as you point out in the preamble here, that he's saying to Nancy Pelosi and the congressional Democrats, I did my job. It's time for you to do yours. It's up to you. I have put the ball in your court. You can do with it whatever you want. But let me be very clear. I was giving this to you, which he should have been clearer about in the report or not waited 9 weeks to speak. But the message is clear, and I think he is ready to move on and let the next part of this process take place if that's the path Democrats choose, which we'll discuss why they should do that later.
Yeah, and I think what he chose to emphasize in his 8-minute statement versus the 400-page report that he wrote is important too. You know, he says a few times at the beginning and at the end about how, you know, Russia, the Russian military, the Russian government launched this concerted, consistent attack on our political system. And then he said obstructing the investigation into who's behind that attack and who was responsible for it is a very serious misdeed. And basically what he lays out is if Trump had succeeded in obstructing the investigation, if Trump had succeeded in firing Bob Mueller, if Don McGahn and all of Trump's subordinates had carried out his wishes to fire Bob Mueller and to make sure that the investigation was only focused on future election interference, which the report says Trump wanted to do, then Bob Mueller never would have been able to indict the Russian hackers, the Russian military, all the people in Russia that were responsible for breaking into the Democratic email system, stealing emails, disseminating stolen emails, and then launching the social media campaign, propaganda campaign to sway the election. And so, Mueller actually doing justice, finding the people responsible for the attack on our political system would not have been possible if the President of the United States had his way and obstructed justice. And I think he's trying to tell us that is a very serious offense.
That's right. And the question will be if anyone's going to listen. I will say that Bob Mueller could have been clearer on this point, and he could have been clearer earlier on this point, right? Because a lot of people, I feel like you and I got the message, but a lot of people didn't. A lot of the reporting is trying to read it like it's some sort of code, and like, what can we divine from this? When he's pretty explicit. It is certainly not clear that Democratic leaders took the message. Some of the reporting is unclear, and this is both the benefit and just the positive and the negative of having someone like Bob Mueller do this investigation. He is theoretically, although only in theory, not in reality, above reproach in the public sphere. Right? He should have been an unimpeachable investigator if we were living in normal political times. He is someone with a reputation that is so good that the Senate in a huge bipartisan vote, voted to extend his term as FBI director because he was so good at the job. Someone that Republican, someone that had been appointed by George W. Bush, extended by Obama. Like, he is the ultimate nonpartisan figure, even if he is a Republican. But because he is a nonpartisan figure, he was much more subtle, much less explicit, and some room both in his, not what he wrote in the report, but in the way in which he presented the report, in the way in which he allowed institutional figures like Bill Barr to spin his report for him. He left more questions about what he intended than he should have. And I think that's still true today.
Good game.
Yeah, I think that Mueller's biggest mistake was allowing that 4-page letter from William Barr to be released before his executive summary, and then after that 4-page letter was released, not responding immediately to correct the record. That was his mistake. I do think in the statement he delivered yesterday, it could not be more clear than the sentence. The opinion says that the Constitution requires a process other than the criminal justice system to formally accuse the sitting president of wrongdoing. It screams impeachment. That is the process he's talking about right there. Hey, look, I get the box he's in because of the Justice Department.
This man looks like John Wick.
Right? He feels that it is unfair to accuse a sitting president of a crime if that person cannot then defend themselves using a normal court process. And so therefore that's even why he can't say, Congress, it's your job to impeach him and say the word impeachment referral, because even that, and the Washington Post says this, Mueller's team believe that even that was accusing the president of a crime without the president being able to defend himself through a normal court process. So Mueller did everything he could to basically say, here's the evidence that the president committed a crime, but I can't say that the president committed a crime because I can't charge him because he's a sitting president because of this stupid fucking opinion. Well, I don't know if he thinks it's a stupid fucking opinion, but it is. So you can see the box he's in. So I sort of understand that. I can't understand why either reporters, Democrats in Congress, I can understand why Republicans do this because they are conspiracy theorists and are, willfully ignorant of this. But I can't understand why Democrats and reporters don't, I'm sorry, I'm trying this again. I can't understand why there are any mixed messages coming from what he said yesterday. It seemed pretty clear to me.
Yeah, it's like this is the hard part of undoing first impressions, right? It's like
That's right.
We would be in an entirely different world. It would probably be weeks into an impeachment inquiry right now if the way this had played out was he had submitted his letter or his report to Bill Barr and Robert State, and then made this statement on that Friday night or that Sunday.
Yep.
Either before or contemporaneous to Bill Barr sending out his letter. And if he had done that, then we would be in a world. Or if he had let it be known to the public that he disagreed with the characterization of the report in real time instead of waiting weeks.
Red team scores.
So I understand the box he's in. And we really should be thankful to Bob Mueller for his service to this country throughout his entire life, including taking on what is a thankless but very important job, even beyond just accountability to President Trump, but holding Russian entities and Russian individuals accountable for what happened in the election. But there is a world in which you have to understand that what is happening is not on the level and adjust your tactics as such. And so, like writing a letter to Bill Barr saying you want your summaries out, but then Bill Barr ignoring you and then writing another letter and then just saying, well, I tried, is not sufficient if you believe in the work that you did. And it's the same thing goes to the question of his testimony, right? I understand why he doesn't want to testify, but that is not how the world works. And if you truly believe that this is really important, that the work you did was important, it should stand on itself, and the public and the Congress should make a decision based on the work itself, not on the propagandization of the work by Trump, Bill Barr, and Fox News, then you got to speak for that work yourself. And there's not a substitute for that is appropriate in this day and age.
What do you think Democrats should do about his reluctance to testify? How much does his testimony matter at this point?
I think what we know from yesterday is his testimony matters a lot. If he just sat in a chair and read all 400 pages of the report out loud, I think it would be very dramatic and important. Does it mean it shifts all of the public
1 minute remaining?
No, not necessarily. But a person is a better messenger than a PDF, and so having him do that would be good. I think we have to set expectations in our own minds as consumers and the Congress people do, and theirs, that Bob Mueller is not Jim Comey. He is not going to preen for the cameras. He's not going to try to be dramatic. He is going to be as boring as he possibly can. But as we saw from yesterday, that just there's so much confusion around this. There's so much bullshit that just saying the words out loud in a mostly clear way helps cut through that bullshit. So I think he will be getting a subpoena one way or the other. And Adam Schiff, basically, as I heard yesterday, said, "Great, I look forward to hearing from Mueller soon." So I think they're going to make him come testify in some way, shape, or form.
I think the more nonpartisan and boring Bob Mueller is during his testimony, the more politically effective it will be. Frankly, and I think that James Comey was less politically effective because he decided to go after Trump. Talk about his fucking tanning goggles, all that bullshit. I mean, he did sound in a way like he had joined the resistance at some point. And Bob Mueller, being nonpartisan and just reading or reiterating the conclusions from his report in front of Congress. Look what an 8-minute statement did yesterday. This is also, I mean, we're going to talk about this later, but it's another argument for the power of impeachment hearings in an age of television and media, where people aren't reading a 400-page report, but when something is televised live for weeks at a time, and it's all over cable and it's all over Twitter and it's all the news and information that most Americans are consuming, it has a much, much bigger impact on people than any kind of report that Bob Mueller could release. And I think Democrats are probably underestimating the power of televised hearings that lay out for the American people exactly what misdeeds and crimes the president committed.
Yeah, and they shouldn't be, because the original approach that the Democratic leadership in the Congress proposed was as either a substitute for or a preamble to impeachment would be a series of very high-profile televised hearings with star witnesses to pull on the threads of the Mueller report and other associated Trump crimes and corruption. So, that was the plan they wanted. Don McGahn in front of the Senate or the House Judiciary Committee. Bob Mueller in front of the House Judiciary Committee. Donald Trump Jr. in front of the House Intelligence. That was the plan. But that plan has not worked out for a host of reasons that also lead you to the path of impeachment.
Yep. So another reason we know that Mueller's statement was a big deal is that Trump dropped his total exoneration bit and tweeted immediately after the statement, quote, "There was insufficient evidence, and therefore, in our country, a person is innocent. The case is closed. Thank you." And then today, waking up to this was fun. Today he tweeted, "I had nothing to do with Russia helping me get elected." Whoops. And then he goes out to the White House South Lawn, and he gives a little impromptu press conference to reporters, and I believe we have a clip of that we're going to play right now.
To me, it's a dirty word, the word impeach. It's a dirty, filthy, disgusting word, and it had nothing to do with me. So I don't think so, because there was no crime. It's
flag taken.
And not with or. It's high crimes and misdemeanors. There was no high crime and there was no misdemeanor. So how do you impeach me? And it came out that there was nothing to do with
flag
Russia.
returned.
The whole thing is a scam. It's a giant presidential harassment. And honestly, I hope it goes down as one of my greatest achievements, because I've exposed corruption. Like nobody knew existed.
Can I just say something? There's obviously a lot of problems with that statement, but maybe the biggest is that under Trump's definition of what constitutes an impeachable offense, you can commit a high crime, but if you don't also commit a misdemeanor, you're off the hook.
I mean, there's just so much to unpack there. First, our anti-immigrant America First president would undoubtedly fail the citizenship test. Undoubtedly. Like, there's no concept of how anything within our government works, which is scary because he's in charge of the government. He also is just the king of the self-oath. He's like, where you mentioned previous, where he, in an attempt to defend himself, finally admits that Russia helped him win. Here he says he exposed a lot of corruption, which is true. It's just his corruption.
Yeah, his obstruction did succeed in exposing his own corruption. So that's a big win for him. No, I mean, but does that statement sound like the statement of someone who is goading Democrats into impeachment because he thinks it will be politically beneficial for him?
No, that has been one of, I think, the worst arguments against impeachment is it's what Trump wants.
Yeah.
It is.
Doesn't seem like it's what he wants.
There is a very real debate about what is good or bad politically, and we won't have that. But just if you know anything about Trump, the idea that he can't even fathom the idea that he is one of a tiny handful of presidents who won the Electoral College and lost the popular vote. He has had
red flag taken.
An X-Files style conspiracy to justify that black mark on his presidential record. So imagine how he would act if he were to become one of 3 presidents who had to wear the scarlet eye at impeachment.
And
like, there's no way he wants that. Like,
and
in his mind, like, the constant is trying to navigate the dissonance between the reality of Trump with, like,
red flag
who he
dropped.
is, how bad a president
red
he is,
flag taken. Red flag dropped.
What a poor
red flag taken. Red flag taken. Flag returned. Red flag taken. Blue team scores.
Into Mount Rushmore, and whenever he falls into the area between us, that dissonance comes through is when he acts like a lunatic. And so impeachment is most certainly something that he would dread because it makes it harder to abide the fantasy that he is somehow not a giant fucking loser.
He would be the only president in history to have won the presidency while losing the popular vote and getting impeached, and by his own admission, having a foreign government help him get elected in the first place.
That is a very specific category.
I mean, it is.
That is very much like what is vogue in sports statistics now, when they're like, Steph Curry is the first player under 6'4" to average 28 points, 5 rebounds, and 3 steals.
It's also
red flag taken.
Well, it also goes to the core of what he cares about, which is the legitimacy of his presidency. Because if you look at his presidency and say, okay, well, the guy won without winning the popular vote. He won because a foreign government helped him get elected, and then he got impeached.
Red flag returned.
That doesn't make him feel very good about his presidency. He also, by the way, said, it wasn't part of that clip, but he said of impeachment, the courts will never allow it.
Right.
Hey, buddy. Courts, they do not have anything to do with it. I'm sorry. Except for the fact that John...
That is a little bit of him, like, saying the quiet part out loud, which is, like, he knows, and McConnell knows, Republican Party knows, that they have been stacking the courts in his favor, and he's basically looking down Pennsylvania after the Supreme Court, and in his head, I put Brett Kavanaugh on there and Neil Gorsuch, and Mitch McConnell stole that seat from Obama, so, like, I have immunity by court theft.
Yeah, what's the problem?
So I think he really does think that, which is why he's so fucking outraged when all of his unconstitutional, illegal acts get overturned in court. He's like, I put all my guys, my judges, right? He calls them his judges. I put my judges on the court, and why aren't I getting rulings that are in my favor? And so I do think he thinks the courts will protect them because he has stacked the courts.
Just wait till John Roberts, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, presides over the trial in the Senate, and Trump starts saying, like, why is crooked John Roberts there? Why isn't Brett Kavanaugh presiding over the thing? He doesn't get how any
team scores. Red flag taken.
So let's talk about the Democrats and what they should do now. Just about all the major presidential candidates put out statements supportive of impeachment to various degrees. Yesterday, 2 more House Democratic chairmen announced their support for impeachment, bringing the pro-impeachment vote in the House to around 40, 41, 42 Democrats, and 1 Republican, Justin Amash. that still leaves approximately 200 or so Democrats who are either opposed or undecided, including House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and most of her top leadership. On Wednesday, Pelosi said, quote, "Nothing is off the table, but we do want to make such a compelling case, such an ironclad case, that even the Republican Senate will be convinced. We want to do what gets results." Dan, what kind of pressure does Mueller's statement yesterday put on Pelosi? How does this affect her decision? And what do you think of her reasoning yesterday?
It puts more pressure on. I think the thing that probably puts the most pressure is Justin Amash, a Republican congressman facing a primary challenge, not only being essentially the most vocal advocate for impeachment in the House, going to a town hall in his Republican district and standing up and getting a standing ovation for making that case. I think that puts the most pressure on. Like, we can't live in a world where Republican, even if it's one, but one Republican congressman is showing more courage of their convictions than Democrats in this situation. I think that puts a lot of pressure on. And I just have this sense that the momentum is all on the side of the Democrats who want to hold Trump accountable by opening an impeachment inquiry. Because just think of like the arguments they have. They have the clear moral argument. They have the clear constitutional argument. They have the better argument around legal strategy in the sense that Trump is stiff-arming everything that they want to do, and that their hand and getting access to those documents and those witnesses is strengthened by an impeachment inquiry. And the argument on the other side is essentially Trump committed impeachable offenses, but we're not going to do impeachment because of politics or something. And that is just that's not
red flag taken.
You're not exciting anyone with that. You're not.
It's not a logically coherent
argument. Hard to win that argument over the long term.
Flag returned.
It's not
1 minute
a great
remaining
argument, and it is exacerbated by the fact that people are very skeptical, for good reason, about members of the Democratic establishment telling the activists to check their passion because of political strategy. Right? That just
blue team scores.
We now believe, for better or worse, that no one knows anything, and so
you win.
Why would you take that on face value, that doing the right thing morally, constitutionally, legally is the wrong thing politically? Why would you allow that argument to trump, no pun intended, what you believe?
And look, I've obviously been in favor of proceeding with impeachment for a little bit now, but I understand where Nancy Pelosi is coming from. I will make her argument for her.
Can you hear me?
If you look at polls
I can hear
right
you.
now,
Can you hear me?
Okay, good.
Democrats are in favor of impeachment by around 75% of Democrats. Independents are slightly opposed. Republicans are obviously very, very opposed. Pelosi's looking out at her caucus. She's looking at the seats that gave the Democrats the majority in the House, that made her speaker. Those seats are in districts where those Democrats would not have won those seats if they did not get a good amount of votes from independents, from some Republicans. Ask Katie Porter, ask Lauren Underwood, ask Antonio Delgado.
My life is a lie. My life has been a lie.
And so if you look at the polls and you see independents and Republicans against impeachment, you see that not even all Democrats are for impeachment.
Yes, let's go.
That you're not going to get a conviction out of the Senate because Republicans are going to stand by Trump. You say yourself, why put the caucus through that?
Hey, where are we landing at?
And why take that vote if we know that a majority of Americans, overwhelming majority of Americans, agree with us on So this is where Nancy Pelosi is coming from. The counter to that is that's where public opinion is right now.
Where are we going, guys?
At a time where only one half of one party is making the case why the President of the United States should be impeached. And we haven't had a trial. We haven't had all these televised investigations, all this testimony. We haven't made a consistent, coherent argument about why Donald Trump should be impeached. All the news right now is process arguments. It's about contempt citations. It's about getting Don McGahn to testify. Who the fuck is Don McGahn? Most people don't know. So all of this is, we're in the weeds on process right now, and we haven't begun to make the actual argument for impeachment. So the truth is, we don't know where the politics will end up on impeachment. They could be bad for Democrats. They could be good. anyone who tells you they know where the politics are going to end up a couple months from now, a year from now, they're not telling the truth because none of us know. So the question is, do you do what seems right, what seems like the logical thing to do, what gives you the most compelling, coherent, logical argument, which is, here's the special counsel investigated the president, found that he committed a bunch of crimes. By the way, he's been abusing his power in office in all these other ways since the day he was elected, since before he was elected. This is why he's unfit for office. This is why he's dangerous. This is why he feels like he's above the law. Lay out the case. Who knows what might happen then?
As is probably clear to people who are listening now, that my opinion has shifted on this over time. I have been...
So talk about that. And by the way, everyone should check out your piece in Crooked.com today about how Democrats can win the politics of impeachment if we go down that road. It's a fantastic piece, and so everyone, please check it out.
Now I just write strategy memos for the open internet. It's become my new life.
Someone needs to.
So right after the Mueller report dropped, I agreed with Nancy Pelosi that the best path was keep impeachment on the table, right? So all the people like Steny Hoyer in the moment who said we're not going to impeach, that's a mistake. You have to keep it on the table because, my view right after the Mueller report dropped was,
I can see it from here.
You should keep impeachment on the table. You should do a series of high-profile hearings in the normal course of business, that in the Oversight Committee, the Judiciary Committee, the Intelligence Committee, that dramatize what was in the Mueller report and expand upon it, right? And so I thought that, and then at the end of that process, if you can build support within the caucus and the country for impeachment, you should proceed. There have been two things that have caused me to believe that now impeachment inquiry is the best path for Democrats to take. The first is the path that Nancy Pelosi originally put forward is not available because Congress decided to take an unprecedentedly unconstitutional approach to the balance between two separate but equal branches of government, and to say that no oversight. And everything is important.
I just put them on the ground.
I will not cooperate. We'll get that's going to be true on everything from what was in the Mueller report to the hurricane, to oversight into the botched response, the tragically botched response to the hurricane in Puerto Rico, to just all the other information discussed with that administration. And so you're deprived the opportunity to expose to the public what Trump did through the normal course of business. So that's one. And the second one is, I sort of had this gnawing feeling.
Hey, you want to say something funny? Gotta go incognito, boy.
It's almost like a deja vu as I've been talking about this. And so
does it work?
On Friday,
can you see me?
Friday, I was on Twitter, as often happens on a Friday, any other day.
Or any day. I still see your name tag covering.
I saw that Robbie Mook, who was Hillary Clinton's
campaign. Well, that's because we're on the same team.
So I clicked on that. And people were very worked up because CNBC had written an article that said
50,000 people used to live here. Now
voter activists are mad.
Please tell me you get that
reference. Pelosi for not moving on impeachment, but political strategists agree with her. And it went through and quoted a lot of very smart, very accomplished pollsters, political consultants, essentially the people whose job it is to keep the House, take the Senate, win the White House. And included in that group was Robbie Mook, who said that avoiding impeachment was the better political move. And I just had this feeling, not that I don't respect all of the people quoted in that story, this feeling that there was just something deeply uncomfortable about, once again, the professional political class of, I consider myself at least adjacent to, if not an actual member of, telling activists, we know better what is good politically, so
more like shredded because I played that guitar too much.
Or constitutional or whatever. That just felt very uncomfortable, and it felt like an unsustainable position for the party to be in, because you're basically putting a neon sign over your head that says, we are not doing what we believe is right. We are doing what we believe polls better. And that is always terrible politics.
Yeah.
Oh no, what about thing two? What happened to them?
It is very hard to convince people that you are the change that they believe in when you act like the most typical fucking politician in American history. And that is how Democrats are coming off right now, because no one is making the counter-argument to impeachment on anything other than politics. Right. They're going out and saying, it's what Trump wants, it'll solidify his base. The polls say it's bad. All of those are not arguments to persuade people to your position. And I think that is a huge problem. And so I took from that, I was like, maybe I should, as a thought exercise, try to make the case for why the politics of impeachment are good.
There it is.
Right? That maybe that all the consultants are wrong. And so I spent way more of my weekend writing that piece than I intended to. But ultimately, I couldn't convince myself that they were good.
Because then we'll lose.
Right? That, honestly, like, what I came away from was that the politics are not, like, the politics that matter are not what they are now. Like, it is how they are at the end of this. And that there is huge political...
Oh, can I get that pistol ammo right there?
In heading down an impeachment path. There is no doubt about that. But there is also as much, if not more, risk in not heading down that path and basically turning a blind eye to your constitutional responsibility. And we can talk about why that is, but what it really came down to was instead of trying to debate whether it was good politics or bad politics, or if or when we do impeachment, I decided to focus on how we do it. To think about if we go down this path, which I think we are probably, at least seems as of today, like we are going to get to eventually. What would be the best way to do it to manage those politics, to see if you can turn this into a moment when we are doing the right thing for the country, but we are also maximizing our chances to keep the House, defeat Trump, and even take back the Senate. I think there is a path to do that, and that's what I laid out with you.
I think the point you just made about what does the path look like, what does the next year look like if we do not pursue impeachment is a very important point and something that we haven't talked about as much. If you told me that if we walk away from impeachment, we could engage Donald Trump and the Republican Party in a great debate over health care coverage, or a great debate over tax cuts, the Republican tax cuts, or the regulations they're stripping away and how they're helping Wall Street banks and all this other kind of stuff. If you told me that we could have that debate every day from now until the election in 2020, I'd tell you I'd rather have that debate than have a debate about impeachment. But that's not the presidency we're dealing with. That's not the age of media that we're dealing with right now. And I think it's a misunderstanding of how Trump captures the news cycle every day and how he acts as a president. Which is, he's already told us that he is basically going to try to investigate his political opponents, turn this around on the Democrats, try to have show trials by the time we're in the election, next year. He's got his attorney general now investigating the investigators. He's going to beat up on Democrats every day. And I've come to think that basically this is a race against time to find out who can own more news cycles between now and the 2020 election, the Democrats or Donald Trump. And as we saw today, going after Trump on the crimes that he committed, on the impeachable offenses that he's committed, puts him on the defensive, makes him angry, and prevents him from being on offense against Democrats as he is on other days of the week, when we're out there trying to get our message out. Now, this doesn't mean that our presidential candidates and our congressional candidates shouldn't be out there at town halls every single fucking day talking about their plan for healthcare and their plan for wages and all the other kind of stuff. But it does mean that we are in this constant media battle to see who can own the microphone that day. And Donald Trump, 9 times out of 10, is always in control of the microphone. Impeachment, having the eyes of the nation focused on these live televised hearings over and over again, is perhaps one way, perhaps the only way, to finally wrest the microphone away from Donald Trump.
I think that is right. And as I was trying to factor the politics in my head, and it is, like, there is something uncomfortable about, like, this is Congress's most sort of sacred responsibility, right? Is the biggest thing they do would be to undertake an effort that could lead to the removal of an elected president. Like, that is a big thing. And so you sort of, it feels weird to talk about politics, but it is a political process.
It is.
It is, the founder sort of intended it that way by giving it to the elected representatives of the public as opposed to the judiciary, which was also, they had 3 branches. They had to choose 2 here, and they chose the one staffed by people who have to face the voters. But also we know it's political in the sense that Trump has immunity by Republican cowardice in the Senate, right? We have to be very clear. He is not going to be removed from office.
Right.
So we have to think about what we're trying to achieve here, and it is a political objective. And so a couple of thoughts about how to think about that. One is we have to think about an impeachment proceeding as what matters is the journey, not the destination. I don't, as much as it will bother Donald Trump to be one of a tiny handful of impeached presidents, what matters is what we tell people into getting there. I don't think voters are going to be like, I was for him until you impeached him. But it could be that in the context of what they learned over the course of that time, they were less likely to support Trump, or they decided that a Democrat would be better off. And so I think that is the way to think about it, right? It's not what's going to happen at the end. It's what's going to happen between the day you open the inquiry and Election Day 2020, and how can you inform voters, and a very specific set of voters, right? New and sporadic voters who helped elect Democrats in 2018, the voters who voted for Trump in 2016 but disapprove of him now, the voters who voted for a third-party candidate in 2016, will they be available to us? Like, that's how we have to think about that. The second thing is, I think the arguments against impeachment politically they're not precise enough, or they're somewhat inaccurate. And so they should at least be tested. It may still turn out that the risk of impeachment is tremendous. And everything's risky. Like getting out of bed is risky, right? So, but the 2 points that people often cite is the effects of the Republicans impeaching Bill Clinton in 1998. And the way that story is told is historically inaccurate because a couple of important points. One, Bill Clinton won seats in 1998, which came as a big surprise and was very unusual for a midterm election in a president's second term. And impeachment was something that was being discussed in that election because Republicans were talking about it as a response to the Ken Starr investigation and Bill Clinton's conduct. But the impeachment didn't happen until after the election. So the Republicans didn't. So basically, if we do not impeach or begin impeachment proceedings against Trump before the 2020 election, we are essentially rerunning the play that did not work in 1998, which is you put something that is a radioactive issue like impeachment on the table, but then you spend no time or effort to explain to people why you're doing it. They raise the charge without prosecuting the case. Yep. Second point is, yes, it is true that at the height of impeachment, Bill Clinton's approval ratings skyrocketed to 73% in the Gallup poll. That is true. But
press the start button on the scoreboard to play.
They were 66% on the day of in the last Gallup poll before the 1998 election. And while they hit 73 right as Bill Clinton was being impeached, his numbers went back down to what was sort of his baseline for the rest of his term, which was high 60s, low 50s, which is still very high, but we were also sort of living in a different, less polarized era. And then in the first election after impeachment,
ready to start.
Democrats did pick up seats in the House and they did pick up seats in the Senate, so we should be clear about that. But Bill Clinton, vice president, lost election in part because the George W. Bush, against Al Gore at the time, ran explicitly against Clinton's conduct. He talked about returning decency to the Oval Office. He was very specific that he was running against Bill Clinton's conduct and the associated chaos that came from all the investigations, the impeachment. And even though Bill Clinton remained relatively popular, he was at least toxic enough with swing voters at the end of that election that Al Gore decided that Bill Clinton, the incumbent Democratic president, could not campaign for him down the stretch. We can debate whether that was the right decision or wrong decision, but the fact that he even thought it is proof that impeachment had an impact on Bill Clinton's political life. And so I think we have to think about, at least have to understand the historical example correctly before we decide the politics of impeachment going forward.
Yeah, I think the other important point about that historical example is the argument that Republicans made for impeachment was somewhat distorted because they're basically saying, yes, you might like this president.
Let's go, people. Everyone be ready.
You might think he's doing a good job, this president. You might like the economy.
Look up above you.
Personal conduct. And I think that gets to a very important point that you also raised in your piece today, which is that the Democrats' messaging around impeachment and why they're impeaching Donald Trump and what for is critical. And I do think that if Democrats focus only on the Mueller report, that will be a political mistake. And a mistake in general, because what Trump did around Russia is not the only impeachable topic. And even broader members of power. I mean, just imagine a set of impeachment hearings where you not only talk about the Mueller report, but you talk about how Trump has been using his presidency to promote private businesses and get rich, which has encouraged corporations, foreign governments to funnel money into the Trump Hotel in Mar-a-Lago if they want to influence, say, a corporate merger or U.S. foreign policy. You ask people, is that how we want our president to make decisions? Can you afford to join the private club? If you need a certain policy? He's praised himself above the law. He's used his power to target his political enemies. He's ordered investigations into Hillary, Biden, Obama officials. He's tried to make Amazon pay more for postage because of a personal feud with Jeff Bezos, the company's owner. Imagine if he did that to your company. He's pardoned his friends and business associates even when they violated human rights like fucking Joe Arpaio or stole money from people like his former business partner, Conrad Black. He told Border Patrol agents he'd pardon them if they broke the law. He's considering right now pardoning war criminals.
You can't reload. I mean, that's why I don't use double weapons.
His government tried to cover up the murder of a Washington Post journalist by a foreign government who he currently has a secret financial relationship with. And then there's issues that actually, matter to people's lives. He acted illegally to sabotage the Affordable Care Act, build a border wall using money that Congress refused to appropriate, and separate immigrant children from their families, some of whom his government has lost. I mean, imagine the witnesses that you could bring before Congress to tell these stories and how you could connect his actions and his misdeeds and his crimes to what really matters to the American people. It doesn't have to be about just obstruction and contempt and the Mueller report and all this stuff. We can make this about issues that really matter to people.
The other point I just want to make about the politics of it, right? Because, the thing that matters is people also say Democrats won in 2018 because they didn't follow Trump down rabbit holes. They had a disciplined the second piece, and they also ran, whether they were running blue districts or deeply red districts, because they ran on checks and a balance against the chaos. And we talked about this catalyst report. One of the catalyst report was one of the things that caused Democrats to have such a 2018 was a surge of and what message is if you sell to them in 2018 that you're going to provide a check and balance for Trump. But then in 2019, you turn a blind eye to what is essentially an impeachment referral from Bob Mueller about obstruction of justice. But what message is that then? The key to getting people to get off the side of the table and then get people being first time voters, second, third, fourth time voters to show them that they're vote matters. So if you make them an example, break that you are putting yourself at risk in 2020. You need everyone from 2018 and then some to win the election. So, yes, there are real concerns about how this will affect some of those Obama voters that voted for a Democrat in 2018. Yes, there is some concern about how this will affect Republicans who voted for Trump in 2016 but now disapprove him and got them to vote for Detroit. There is some effect on that, but there's also an effect on the other side of the ledger and what it says and impact. Sorry, Michelle. There's also an effect on potentially base turnout. And we have to look at a holistic picture here about the politics and not simply assign it to a set of white working class voters in the Midwest and allow them to dictate the strategy for the party, which I think too often times we do.
Yes, and last point here, and you make this. Last point here, and you talk about this in your piece as well, is I think Democrats should use the low expectations that impeachment will result in Trump's removal in their favor. Right? The jury is not the Senate. The jury is the American.
Oh, sorry.
And as Democrats start this, I think they should say explicitly, we don't necessarily expect that Mitch McConnell and the Senate Republicans are going to show political courage for the first time in the Trump presidency and do the right thing here. But we want everyone in that Senate on record before the 2020 election, and then the American people can decide. It's Susan Collins, who's going to be hopefully in a close race with me. Corey Gardner, who's going to be in a tight race in Colorado. If Martin McSally is going to be in a tight race in Arizona. If they want to look at all this evidence about the president's abuse of power and unfit prerogative and say, we stick with Donald Trump, we're going to not have any accountability for Donald Trump whatsoever. We're going to let him off the hook. If they want to take that vote, they can take that vote and they can face the voters in 2020. And so, therefore, we set up a thing where when, the Senate exonerates Donald Trump and he says, oh, they exonerated me, no one's surprised. Because we know that basically this is about making a case to the American people, which we're going to do anyway, about why Donald Trump is the second time. And then the voters can decide. Absolutely, Collins right now. I bet if a reporter asked me to vote to exonerate Donald Trump or impeach Donald Trump, because we'd say, well, I have to see the evidence. We wouldn't say I'm not excited to vote on impeachment. Corey Gardner's not excited to take a vote. People are like super psyched that Democrats are pursuing this and then they get to vote to exonerate Donald Trump. I don't think so.
Yeah, they have no choice because if they vote to exonerate Donald Trump in blue states in a presidential election year, they face real risk of wrath of both jacked up Democratic turnout and independent voters. So a state like Colorado, independents are the largest portion of the electorate. And if they were, some people have said to me since I pieced that, well, wouldn't McConnell just let Gardner, Collins, McSally, et cetera, vote to convict Trump? Because basically no Trump voters would turn out. So you're putting tremendous pressure on them in possible positions, which there's a way in which you beat Donald Trump, which is what this is what we are seeing. That's the right. This is unfortunate. You have that plan.
Give me pause.
And that is not
Yeah, and I think that's where my biggest anxiety is, that we fail it becomes a bunch of Democrats and disarray stories, and we fuck it all up, and like the guy who ate a bunch of fried chicken when John McGahn didn't show up for his testimony. That's the kind of shit that will be politically. Okay, talked a lot about this. Let's talk about the Democratic primary. On Wednesday, the Democratic National Committee announced its third presidential primary debate in November, along with new requirements for candidates to qualify. Candidates will now have to have 130,000 unique donors, up from the current threshold of 65,000 unique donors, and they will have to poll at 2% or higher in at least 4 national or early state polls, up from the current rule of 1% in 3 polls.
Okay, everyone be careful.
The new rules will dramatically winnow the number of candidates that make the debates. As it is now, 19 candidates have qualified for the first debates later this month. These new rules will trim the field possibly down to 7, 8, 9. Dan, is this a good idea?
It's hard to say it is an effort, and I'm very sympathetic to the challenges the DNC faces, right? They wanted, especially after what happened, they wanted to make it very possible to give as many people an opportunity to go from the bottom of the pack to the top of the pack. And so they set the standard of 1% in the poll and 65,000 unique.
Ouch!
Make it so that grassroots support, small dollar grassroots support should be encouraged. It just turned out that it's easier to get that threshold than people expected. And that's sort of the top of the time. Usually there's just more engagement among a wider array of candidates. Then it's easier to get people to get, like, you think that people get a $2 online, so putting money behind social media ads, which is what all these candidates have been spending all their money on. It's the still big donations, and so you can get there. So they're trying to balance not putting their thumb on the scale in favor of establishment candidates who are currently frontrunners, with, I think, also an obligation to the voters that they get to see the candidates who are most likely to
Where'd you get a shotgun? I want a shotgun.
Engage with each other, right? Like, if we go through a bunch of debates and we never see Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden or Kamala Harris and Bernie Sanders or Biden and Bernie Sanders engage with each other, then that is a disservice, right? Like, if we end up in a world where Biden is on stage with Marianne Williamson, Andrew Yang, a bunch of people who have a very, very small chance as of then you're not really getting to see candidate. So they're trying to find the right balance. I think this could dramatically at this point. It's just going to be very hard to get a lot of these candidates. 1% is sort of the margin of error to get.
Yeah, man, I'm down. Somebody fire me.
So, you could be down to, 8 to 10 candidates pretty quickly. And I'm told like it's as hard as but I think ultimately this is probably the right thing to do. It's just we're living in a world of unintended consequences.
Yeah, I am sympathetic to all the candidates who are currently, polling around 1% the threshold, and I'm sympathetic to their argument. Well, I just need more time. I'm sort of in this catch-22. Like, I need I need to be able to break through, but in order to break through, I sort of need the media exposure, and that's why I need this debate. And I get that to a point, but the counterexample here is who was small town mayor. He was on nobody's radar. He was able to, through his CNN town hall and report interview, he was able to reach the top tier through several breakout runs, and it took him about. And if this new threshold were in place for these first two debates, I'd say it was certainly unfair. But by the time September rolls around, and all these candidates have been campaigning for a couple months, and they've all had their chance to do their CNN town halls, and by the way, they're going to do 2 national debates and get their message out. They still can't 50% in the polls. Then I think it's fair to say, we still are going to have about 8 or 9 candidates on stage at once together. That's still a huge deal. And 8 or 9 candidates, not the 2 or 8 or 9 candidates most likely to win this race, voters need to see them in a series of exchanges and not hear 30 seconds to a minute from each person and then move on. They need to hear a real debate. And by the way, that field, if it was right now, would be, Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, Kamala Harris, Beto O'Rourke, Cory Booker, Amy Klobuchar perhaps as well. That field would be the most diverse of Democratic candidates maybe in history. 3 women in that field, 2 people of color, a gay man. I mean, that is a very diverse field. It's diverse ideologically. And so I think, if we end up with that field, with that group of candidates by September, after all these other candidates have been campaigning for months and have plenty of sanctioned by the DNC, then I think we're in a pretty good place.
Yeah, the barriers to entry for lesser-known political figures are lesser than they've ever. Let me try again. The barriers to entry have been brought down for lesser-known political figures, and that's not just Mayor Pete. It's also Andrew Yang.
Yeah,
so Mayor Pete, at least, was well known within the party as a rising star. He had turned a run for DNC chair into some fame internally. Even to the point where when we interviewed President Obama on his last day in office, he mentioned Mayor Pete as someone who was a rising star within the party. He's had that rising star label. But Andrew Yang, who's going to be in that debate, came from nowhere, right? He built a following on the internet through an aggressive strategy. And so you still, even if you don't get in the debate, it gets harder, but you can still...
Shut up!
You can still make yourself known because you can get if this is just where like the three networks, CNN and the New York Times and Washington Post decide to get coverage, there are all kinds of ways to get coverage, and you can still do it. And if you have a compelling message and a good story and an interesting agenda, you have a chance. Yep. But the DNC does it to your personal obligation to try to make these debates as informative as possible for the voters. And just simply saying you are running for president, as we said before, is not the same as actually running for president. You have to be putting together a real campaign and getting traction. And whether this is going to be the exact right line, maybe it should be slightly different. Maybe you should have 12 candidates, not 9. You should have 7, not 9. I don't know, but going to a world in which we are we're within 6 months of the Iowa.
You want to join them?
Where we're focusing the attention on the people who've been able to gain traction is probably the right and only path to take. Whether they're doing it the exact right way or not, we'll see how this plays out. But I understand why they did it, and it seems to be the only choice to make.
All right, let's talk about the policy primary. A new story from Thomas Kaplan and Asted Herndon in the New York Times says that Elizabeth Warren is gaining in the polls and seeing bigger crowds, and that she's, quote, been propelled in part by a number of disruptive choices, most notably the breakneck pace at which she introduces policy proposals. Dan, do you agree with that? And what do you think about Warren's overall strategy and the strength of her campaign?
Elizabeth Warren is running the best campaign of anyone in this race. And it's not close.
I agree.
That is not to say there aren't other people running really good races, like the fact that Mayor Pete has gone from nowhere to a top-tier contender and is, by all accounts, raising more money than perhaps anyone else in the field right now, is also incredibly impressive. So we can debate it. But Elizabeth Warren knows why she's running. Her campaign knows what their path to win is. They're running it with strategic discipline. They are playing the long game. They are taking risks. They're consistent with their strategy, and they're being opportunistic to find ways to make news in a very tough news environment, whether it is being the first to, in the context of the presidential campaign, to jump on impeachment, whether it is seeing that every other candidate is doing a Fox News town hall, so you're going to take a strong stance against Fox. Like, she's just running the best campaign. Does that mean she's going to win? No. Does that mean she'll be running still also be running the best campaign 3 months from now? No. But she has a plan for why she is in a great. I mean, this is a little punny, I guess, but she has a plan to win. Right? That is the actual plan she has, and all of her policies ladder up to a narrative about who she is and why she'd be a good president. It's very impressive, just from the perspective of people who have worked on campaigns before, both good ones and bad ones. She is running a very good campaign, and that should be noted.
I completely agree, and it actually bothers me when people talk about Elizabeth Warren's success as only a result of the fact that she's releasing a bunch of policies, because as we have seen in the past, as we've talked about many times about 2016 and about other races, you can put out a slew of 10-point plans and detailed policy papers, and that does not equal a winning political strategy by any means. But the reason that Elizabeth Warren is successful and the reason that her plans are successful is because, like you said, they are all sort of, they all ladder up to that one overarching message, right? Even her policies, it's all about sort of unstacking the debt, right? I'm sorry, they're all about unstacking the debt. They fit a message, right? That, you know, people who are powerful and wealthy, they write the rules, they write the laws, and everyone else gets screwed. And she's saying, we're going to rewrite the laws so that they're more democratic, and we're going to rewrite the rules so that more people have a chance, and all of her policies flow from that. And like you said, she's also been very good about coverage, not just on her plans, but on things like the Fox News town hall, on being out there early on impeachment. She's doing things like going to West Virginia to talk to Trump voters about opioids and just getting news that way. You know, she's out there. She was at an event last week, and she said, ask the other candidates if they get their money from a bunch of millionaires, which is talking about her very difficult and risky decision to ditch high-dollar fundraising events and only do low-dollar fundraising, which is risky, but she's then using it to her advantage by saying, you know, when Mayor Pete and Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and some of these candidates were doing a lot of high-dollar fundraising and raising money from really rich people when they come through here, you ask them where they're getting their money from. I'm getting their money from grassroots donors. And so I really think it's smart that she's putting all the different pieces together, and she's not just focused on throwing out a bunch of policy points.
One thing that is important to note there is her campaign has a very high risk tolerance.
Yes.
They understand that for anyone other than the possible election of Joe Biden, given his commanding lead in the polls right now, for everyone else, winning is a tremendous long shot. Right? It is probably sub 10% for every other candidate, not other than Joe Biden. And because it's very hard to win a primary, period, it's really hard to win in a large, incredibly diverse field like this one. And
Laser
if you
tag.
understand how low
Tag
your
players
chances are
and
of
bots
winning,
to score
then
points.
you recognize that you need
You're on
to
blue
take
team.
risks. You have to have a strategy behind your risks where there's tremendous downside to saying I'm not going to beat this person. Like you are betting, you're betting you're going to be able to sell a graphic message and turn that into enough money to power your campaign. But there's also huge upside benefits if you execute, right? Being in front of impeachment, same situation. And, like I would like to see more understand the importance of risky strategies. They have to be written. It is looking at critical strategies and then being willing to tolerate high risk for high risk. And that is the campaign. And she hasn't done it. Like it was only like a month ago that the New York Times wrote a story that was very criticized by many, but made the point that she was struggling, not moving the polls, not raising money. And since then, she's moved in the polls and raised a lot of money, and is firmly ensconced herself in the top tier of the race, and that's very impressive. The other thing I can say about her campaign is she has adjusted her time. I sort of dreaded the way what it was before.
Online.
2 years ago, Trump first came in office, and she was getting in these Twitter fights with Trump all the time. And it just felt very like she was her strategy was and sort of allowing him to define the four corners of the conversation around Elizabeth Warren. And that you're going to, like, Trump's going to speak, you're going to respond. And it felt 2016-ish to me.
Yeah.
But since then, she has found a way to tell her story and communicate her message.
Red team
right?
leads.
Like Trump is part of every part of every conversation in America. People don't mention it. And her way of communicating the world telling her story right now has really changed from the way that she's a much more effective primary general.
So some of the policy proposals that are owned this week, Joe Biden spending on low-income schools for things like teacher raises and access to pre-K. Beto became the second candidate to release a comprehensive immigration plan that would offer a pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants and end deportations of undocumented immigrants who don't have criminal backgrounds. Kamala Harris released a plan based on the Voting Rights Act that would require states to get pre-clearance to pass abortion restrictions if the state has a bad track record. Dan, what's your reaction to these plans, and if these candidates felt pressured at all by Warren putting all of her plans out?
I think they all seem very like much of the policy that's been released by all well thought out, aggressive, speaks to the moment we're in. And by the moment we're in, I don't mean Trump being president. I mean a world in which we're living in a world of massive transformation, both in our government and our economy, et cetera. And so, like bold, right? Like these are good bold plans. I'm not an expert enough in some of them to know like the exact precision of how good they are, but they're compelling. I certainly think Elizabeth Warren is putting some pressure on some candidates to put out more policies because she set the bar. But this is also, in fairness to these candidates, this is how you run for president, right?
Yeah.
Is that you
put out policies.
You try to tell the public what you stand for, what kind of president you would be, and you try to do it in a way that makes news, right? Kamala Harris did hers. Did her announcement in anticipation of an MSNBC town hall she was doing. Beto O'Rourke is someone who's defined his candidacy around growing up and representing a border district. And so immigration is an important part of it. So I think there's some pressure, but this is also what presidential campaigns should be doing. It's what they sort of owe the voters, and it's an important part of strategy. The key is making your policies be more than a one-day press hit. They have to be a data point in a larger story you're trying to tell the public.
That's exactly right. I mean, I thought the same thing, too. Your policies, it's not just about throwing out random policies to satisfy people who are saying, you need more policy, you're not substantive enough, look at all of Elizabeth Warren's policy, and then you react by throwing out a bunch of policy. Every policy proposal you release every press event you do, every strategic move you make should be in service of the larger story you're trying to tell about why you should be president, why people should vote for you in this very crowded field over everybody else. And even if you don't want to make the explicit argument about why you should be the nominee and not everyone else, it should be implicit in just about everything that you say. And I do think, look, Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders have to worry about this a little less because they have near universal name ID. They're at the top of the field. Everyone everyone knows who they are. And so they're going to lay out their plans and talk about why they should be president. That's that. And then you have the next sort of two people in the polls, Pete Buttigieg and Elizabeth Warren. They've sort of been able to stand out.
Dang.
I mean, Warren's policy is her message in some ways. All of her plans add up to a larger story about where she wants to take the country and what's currently broken about our politics. Pete's personal story and his age and where he comes from in many ways is his message. He's lighter on the policy side right now, but he's sort of telling a story about who he is and where he comes from and generational change with his message. I think then when you get to Beto and Kamala, who are sort of the next two people in the polls, they both stand out in different ways and have different stories to tell, but I think their challenge is to figure out what policies they can put together, what tactics, what strategies they can all put together that tell very unique stories about each of them and why they would be, the best nominee and why they should stand out and why
I'm going to knock someone out in lobby. Let's go.
Qualified nominees.
Yeah, that's right. It is.
Oh, boys, we win.
Every candidate needs to know why they're running for president, what story they want to tell voters. And if you don't
that's a big worry for me.
Everything's just going to be pretty fucking random. I think the Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg comparison is really interesting because Warren is running entirely on policy and Buttigieg is running almost entirely without policy, which doesn't mean he doesn't have positions, but he has been very deft at running in a way that allows people to, regardless of where he's alighted the debates around issues like Medicare for all or the Green New Deal by kind of being for broad versions of lots of things. So if you're for Medicare for all, Mayor Pete is giving you reason, as he did in the Fox America interview, to believe he's open to a Bernie Sanders version of Medicare for all. But if you're against that, he has said he's also willing to consider a buy-in. And so, it's just very interesting that you can have success entirely with policy and have almost as much or as much success without a focus on policy. It's two different campaigns both being run well.
Yeah. What ties them both together is knowing what your story is and why it's unique compared to the rest of the field and driving that message home every single day and not being random about what you decide to speak about and what where you decide to go. So, okay, when we return, we will have our interview with Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Dave Mandel of VIVE. Thank you to Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Dave Mandel for joining us today, and we will see you next week.
Bye, everyone.
All right.
Mm-hmm.